Hello, welcome everyone to AnswerLab's webcast, Smartwatch Apps That Work, 5 Value Drivers to Make Your App Indispensable. AnswerLab and Kerry, Bodine and Co. recently partnered on a user experience research study to examine the expectations, needs, and behaviors of smartwatch owners and prospective buyers. Today, Kerry, Bodine, and AnswerLab CEO Amy Buckner-Chowdhury will be sharing the findings from that research. Quick housekeeping item before we get started. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. However, you can submit any questions at any time throughout the presentation using that Q&A panel at the bottom. And we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kerry to get us started.
Great. Thanks so much. I am really excited to be here. I know Amy is too. And part of the reason that we're so excited is that we really love watches. And all of a sudden, I can't advance the slides. Hang on. There we go. Okay. Yeah, we're kind of crazy in love with watches, and so we had, of course, to do some smartwatch research. Just a little bit about me. I am the co-author of a book called Outside In, The Power of Putting Customers at the Center of Your Business. And I have a consulting firm originally named Kerry, Bodine & Co. And we do customer experience consulting, journey mapping, things like that. And just a little fun fact, my time with wearables goes back to 2002. And I was actually working, designing, and developing wearable applications, and I had a blog called Styleborg for a couple of years that looked at the intersection of technology and fashion and kind of the interpersonal aspects of using wearable technology.
And I'm Amy Buckner-Chowdhury. I'm the CEO and co-founder of AnswerLab. And many of you might be wondering, why are AnswerLab and Kerry, Bodine & Co. partnering together on this study? And it all started with a dear friend of ours named Charlene Lee, who you might know as being the author of Groundswell. Several years ago, she introduced Kerry and myself, and we discovered that we have a shared passion for user experience and customer experience, and we really hit it off. She had basically set us up on a blind professional date, and that date continued to a number of locations across San Francisco, where over time probably on our third date, we discovered we have a passion for wearables. And from that was born this idea today, which is our love child of putting together wearables in UX. So we're thrilled to present to you today the results of this study. You might be wondering, what's the big deal now? For more than a decade, the wearables industry has produced an increasingly steady stream of unitasking devices. So we've had fitness trackers, which have had a lot of widespread adoption, and gadgets like pet activity monitors and gesture-controlled presentation remotes. There are a number of devices out there that really fill these niche areas doing one task. And then we also have other items like prototypes for wrist-mounted selfie drones and their connected motorcycle helmets that eliminate blind spots. But now there are these multitasking smartwatches that have come onto the market that really have the potential to upend the wearables market. And Kerry and I wondered, well, will smartwatches become integral to consumers' connected lives, or will they go the way of Google Glass? So we set out to study these first-generation smartwatches and to learn how brands can take advantage of this tiny addition to the device ecosystem. Now, I'm sure you've all seen that the Apple Watch in particular has been in the news constantly. Daily we hear that demand is slowing down, but then we hear counter-arguments coming out defending these numbers. It's just almost left and right in terms of, is Apple Watch the next thing or is it not? And then we see that a lot of app developers are basically taking a wait-and-see attitude to see what they should be developing for the watch. But today, what Kerry and I will talk about is the current state of user experience with smartwatch apps and how you should think about designing for this new tiny platform. So to go through the agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology so you'll understand how we conducted this research. Kerry's then going to talk about what were some of the purchase drivers for our users who were early adopters of smartwatches. Then I'll go through a bit about what was the big letdown. There was a letdown for our users, and what was it? And then we'll both talk through some really critical value drivers to help you think about creating a killer smartwatch app. And lastly, some tips and tricks on how to get started. And finally, we'll open the floor to a Q&A. So just to give you a little background quickly on the methodology so you're not confused as to how to even get this information, we basically decided to conduct 30 one-on-one interviews in New York and San Francisco with folks who owned or were thinking of buying the Apple Watch, the Moto 360, the Samsung Galaxy Gear Live, and the Pebble. We wanted a really fantastic cross-section of these devices, and we didn't want to focus on any single one. And so we sat in this lab environment. This is exactly what the setup looked like, and we asked them a number of questions. We wanted to explore what were their expectations for the smartwatch and the application's functionality. We wanted to know how the actual watch usage compared to those expectations, and how did they use their watches with their phones. You'll see that in the picture here. You've got the smartphone next to the smartwatch. And then we wanted to understand the functionality they'd like in the future. So essentially, we wanted to get a sense of, for these first-time folks, what's their experience been like. So Kerry will start by sharing what we learned about purchase drivers.
Great. So, wow, this is just not working anymore. My clicker isn't working. So the very first thing that we heard from the participants in our study was that they wanted a smartwatch because of the coolness factor. We've seen smartwatches as part of Hollywood, part of science fiction, part of comics for decades, and people really have bought into that and created this idea that it's going to be so amazing to own one of these devices. So this was a quote from a Samsung Gear owner. It seems high-tech. It seems innovative. It's James Bond. People notice it. And, the people in our study, they considered themselves to be early adopters. And, they thought that this watch would bring them some positive attention in a way that Google Glass didn't. Google Glass brought a lot of negative attention, but this was a really different type of device, and they thought it was really cool. So the second thing that they told us was that they wanted to stay connected without being rude. And this is what one of our Moto 360 owners told us. I can check more discreetly, and it looks more interesting to clients. This was a real estate agent who, kind of liked impressing her clients by using her smartwatch without having to dig into her purse or a briefcase to dig out her phone every time she wanted to find the location of their next house. I also really liked, there was one participant who told us that his favorite place to use his smartwatch was in church. And so, there was this really kind of this discrete usage scenario that people really liked. And this is actually a little bit of a nuance, because if you think about value driver one, it was really about being seen with this cool device. And so people wanted to be seen with it, but they didn't necessarily want to be seen using it and checking information. So kind of an interesting nuance in how people were thinking about using these devices. And then the third purchase driver that we found was that people really wanted to untether. And this is also kind of a nuance from what we just heard in the second value driver. People wanted to stay connected, and yet they wanted to get out in the world and untether, from all of the rest of the digital devices and information that they are typically bound to on a day-to-day basis. They really thought about these devices as being something that they could use as a standalone device apart from their smartwatch. And, they wanted to leave their smartwatches at home and go out into, the wilderness, go out for coffee, go out on a date, without having to lug around a bunch of technology.
And the letdown that we learned from our users is that they basically found smartwatches to be fun and flashy, but in the current state, they're also pretty expendable. So let's talk about a couple of letdowns that were really driving this reaction. The first is that the hardware limitations really curb smartwatch usefulness. So there are three components to this. The first is around battery. So except for the Pebble, the smartwatch models must be charged every single day. And if you forget, the watch won't even tell time. So this is a significant frustration. The second is there's a steep learning curve. So we had really frustrated users opening apps, dismissing alerts, and dictated messages all without meaning to. There's a steep learning curve on some of the gestures they were using as well. And one of the most common things we heard during our study was, oops, where did that come from? And wait, how do I get back? And I'm confused. And then the third component to this is really back to this kind of tethering, which Kerry had talked about. It turns out it's really not an option to be untethered yet for the majority of smartwatches. Owners and prospective buyers alike quickly realized that their futuristic fantasies of consolidating all their devices and being able to leave their phone behind were just that. They were fantasies. And this realization caused many of our prospective buyers to question the purpose of the gadget altogether. So letdown two, smartwatch apps don't provide their anticipated value. And there are three big components to this as well. The first being that there are huge shoes to fill. Phones and tablets have set the bar high for their small screen successor because content now permeates across devices and users can complete many tasks with just a few taps on those devices. And so when their smartwatches in their current state made these interactions less seamless by adding more steps, our users quickly got exasperated. So they want things to be faster and quicker and less clunky. There's also this challenge of the back to phone syndrome. So users are used to choosing when and where they want to complete a task. And our studies users were really protesting when they hit roadblocks or error messages on their watches that then sent them back to their phones to complete a task. And so these kinds of experiences led users to even question why bother. So many smartwatch apps don't have a clear or compelling function at all. And glitches are common today, and so many of our users didn't trust their apps to behave the same way every time. And here's a good quote to kind of illustrate this letdown, which is, I was surprised by how few functions there are. The idea is that you do most stuff on your iPhone. So this was a Pebble owner who was considering getting the smartwatch, the Apple Watch. So Kerry's going to talk a little bit about a model that we created here.
Yeah, so we wanted to create this model to help us understand really where smartwatch apps are today and also where they're going. So we've got a bullseye here, and at the center of our bullseye is where smartwatch apps are really their most valuable. Like many of our smartphone apps are today. They are really indispensable and just a part of our daily lives now. Around that bullseye is an area where the smartwatch apps are, a little less valuable, a little less useful, a little less easy to use. And so they're desirable, people want to use them, but, they're just not indispensable in daily life. And then around the core of those two, and really on the periphery, is where we have just the apps that are not cutting it, the apps that are really not providing value, and they truly are forgettable to users. And we found this quite literally. A lot of the owners told us that, I opened that app once, but I couldn't figure out what it did, so I never went back to it again. I kind of forgot that I even had it at all. And so we find that users have very high expectations and standards for what an app needs to do, and they're just not making allowances for apps that don't live up to that. And unfortunately, what we found is that many of today's smartwatch apps are here in this periphery of value to customers. Now, we also created a similar bullseye here, and this is for the smartwatch itself. And again, at the core, we've got the smartwatch being the most valuable that it can be. It's really an appendage. again, very similar to how many of us, probably most of us on the call today, feel about our smartphones. We really can't leave the house or even function sometimes without them. Around that core of, again, usefulness and utility, we've got the smartwatch being a luxury. And, a lot of our participants told us, yeah, this is kind of a luxury item. I don't have to have it, but I like to have it, again, because of that coolness factor. And then around that core, again, we've got in the periphery the area where we find that, the smartwatches just aren't providing enough value at all to even be used on a regular basis, and we find that smartwatches are abandoned. And there's been, of course, news stories. Lots of people have been writing articles about, here are the 17 things I hate about my smartwatch, and here's why I'm returning it. So that's certainly out there. But what we found is that even though our participants were not very forgiving of apps themselves, they were more forgiving of the smartwatch overall. And so we found that today's smartwatches are here. They're hanging out in that luxury zone. And we've got a few quotes that kind of can help you understand really just what users are thinking about and what they're feeling about smartwatches.
Yeah, so one of our prospective Apple buyers said, it's not a necessity like your phone.
A Moto 360 owner said, I mostly use my watch as a timer.
And then a prospective Samsung buyer, I would want the watch to do more.
A Samsung Gear owner said, I might not replace it immediately. I might even wait for the next model.
And then lastly, a Pebble owner, which is a watch is an extension of the phone, not a replacement. And so our key takeaway from all of this is today's apps still aren't cutting it, and they're dragging down smartwatches with them. And for smartwatches to become essential and to basically be that appendage that Kerry talked about, brands will need to develop killer apps that provide tremendous value. So how do you do that? How do you create that value? Well, that's what we wanted to be able to share with brands and clients today, which is essentially how could you create some level of essentialness and value for your app. So Kerry's going to talk us through a couple of these.
Great. So how can you create apps that make smartwatches and your brand indispensable? We really want to move away from this idea of app apathy, which is really where customers and smartwatch users are today. They've just got plain old apathy for the apps, which has led to smartwatch stagnation. We really want to make sure that we're creating apps that are truly going to be valuable. So the value drivers that we created are, they really stemmed from these expectation gaps that we found in our research. And so expectation gap number one is this. So the expectation was, you're measuring my heart. You must also be in my head. And the reality is, you don't even know what's in my cart. And so, yeah, we found that, when users are strapping these devices onto their bodies for most of their waking hours, it really comes with this expectation of intimacy, this expectation of feeling known and feeling recognized by brands. And so our advice for you is that you need to get intimate with your users. And here are a couple of quotes. Not a couple of quotes. I want to talk first about really what this looks like. What does it mean to get intimate with your users? So Amazon did not really pull this off well. When we're using Amazon on the web, on a tablet, on a smartphone even, Amazon knows us. It knows every single thing we've purchased since, the 1990s, and it knows what we even want to buy before we know what we want to buy ourselves. It makes it super easy for us. It tracks all of our payment information, so we can do that one-click ordering. And not so with their app. The app really doesn't know anything about us at all. And so, you go into the Amazon app and you have to search for something, and it really is like you've come to Amazon for the very first time. So this is not a great example of how to get intimate with your users. We did find a couple of other great examples, and so a couple of them were native to the watches themselves. So one thing that the Apple Watch does is when you're texting with someone, it provides these shortcuts, like, yes, sure, you got it. It just makes it very easy. You don't have to type in a lot of text, which would be very cumbersome on the watch. But what it does is that it knows if you have been texting with someone in another language on your smartphone, it pulls that information over to the watch, and it gives you those same shortcuts for texting in another language. So this is great and really shows that the watch knows who the wearer is. We also found that the Apple Watch provided recommendations and reminders based on the user's personal goals. So one of those is around your personal goals for fitness and the time that you don't spend sitting at your desk. And so it provides recommendations like time to stand up and move a little for 1 minute. And then it provides these nice encouragements based on that, based on what you've actually done. So why is this important? And I mentioned before, users have this expectation for feeling known. And here's a nice quote from a prospective Samsung buyer. She says, if you're tracking my heart rate, I don't just want the number. What should I do about it? So it's an idea of, I don't just want, raw data dumps. I really want you to know me and make the recommendations personalized for me. An Apple Watch owner said, I like that the watch feeds me info on my person at an appropriate level, really reinforcing that idea of feeling known. And then another Apple Watch owner said, I wish it would just figure out whether I was walking or driving and give me the right directions. And so the idea here is that it's really not just about knowing the person's past behaviors and, their preferences, their attributes, their demographics. It's about knowing their context as well, knowing what's going on in the environment and being able to pull that information in as well. So it's really knowing everything that you can possibly know about your users. So how can you do this? Well, you need to use the wealth of data around you. And you need to tap into all those preferences, past behaviors, and current context. And when you're thinking about this, really, the sky is the limit. In the sky, I do mean that kind of literally. We're talking about the cloud here. You don't want to just limit yourself to what you know about your customer through, their watch or even their mobile phone. You want to be going into, their call logs, their calls into your customer service department, their order and purchasing history. Really, every piece of data that you can pull from across your digital business ecosystem and really pull that in to provide the right information and the right meaning from that information as well.
So expectation gap number 2 was really that our participants wanted content that would help them in the moment. So a great way to think about this is this quote here, which is, I want info that's helpful right now in this context. But the reality of their experience with smartwatches today is, what are all these instant notifications? What are they constantly doing here? Where are they even coming from? And so that leads us to value driver number 2, which is that on this device, you have to curate ruthlessly. Think about the transition we all made from desktop to mobile, and now we have to make from mobile to even smaller. Things really have to be pared down. And so let's walk through a few examples of what I mean by this. What you see here is the Pebble, and you see a notification from Facebook. And it says, Jane P. commented on your photo. That was a fantastic time, great memory. So you see how big this is. And at what moment, in what context, is it going to be extremely important that you know this? And so the problem for a lot of our users is that, in some instances, notifications show up on the watch, sometimes even without an app. inundating them with non-essential tidbits that are just irrelevant and distracting. And so I think often, actually, as someone who used to work on my team, who would sit in meetings and was one of the first Pebble adopters, back when it was on, I think it was on Kickstarter, and you know, he would get these Facebook notifications in meetings constantly, and all of us would think he's just looking at the watch and looking at the time, and it was irrelevant to the context. It didn't create a great environment, and it's a frustrating experience for people all the way around. So don't do this, you know, don't create notifications for notification's sake. But what you can do is think about this. This is a dark sky app on the Apple Watch, and it provides contextually relevant weather information about the user's location, such as the next hour's rain forecast and precisely when precipitation is expected to start and stop. So you know if you need an umbrella right before running out the door. So that's super helpful to you as you go about your day. Or think about doing this, and this is my absolute favorite. Uber's created a very streamlined smartwatch app that provides just one hyper-relevant piece of information, and that's the expected wait time plus one critical function, which is request the car. So if any of you have used Uber on your mobile device, you can think back on what that looks like. You see a number of little cars all over the app, and they're moving around like ants. And that's cool to help you get the gist for how the product works and to understand the value proposition and what's going on in the world, and especially for first-time users. But when you get down to the Apple Watch level, it's not necessary. It's not necessary to order an Uber to need to see all of that content. You only need two things. How far away is it, so should I order it, and how can I order it? So I love that example of really paring things down. So why does it matter that we pare things down? Well, do me a favor for a second and hold up your arm like you're looking at your watch. And now imagine holding it there for 5 minutes. And now imagine holding it another 5 minutes. It's just not comfortable for people to hold their arms in this position in order to do complex interactions. So users need relevant content surfaced really immediately so they don't have to spend a lot of time scrolling. And our users just get notification fatigue. They reacted very negatively to constant buzzing and chirping. They got frustrated in our sessions when constant notifications would pop up, and they preferred concise, contextually relevant nudges and alerts. And they did want to get some alerts that were attention-grabbing when they're important, like you're getting a phone call from your boss, or you have a bill that's due or about to be overdue, right? And so I really like this last quote to illustrate this, which is, I want it to wake me with an alert, even when in sleep mode, for something that I've told it is really important. So think about that, the ability for the user to tell you what they want to be notified about versus guessing what to notify them on. So our big recommendation around this value driver is to really strip content and design elements to the bare minimum. You've got to make it short and sweet and nix any content that users can't consume in just a few seconds. Think of like half a standard tweet size. You've got to shorten menus and lists and buttons and go easy on notifications and audit the information that you're pushing via phone and the desktop, and then introduce an austerity filter to limit what gets through to the smartwatch. You have to be militant about this. And then next in this Uber recommendation is the notion around customizing, which is make it easy for customers to change their settings for brief periods, like upping the urgency of a weather notification during an outdoor activity, or even knowing how to automatically do that for them based on their location and calendar and other environmental cues. So again, content has to be relevant in the context they're in. And so now we're on to expectation gap number 3.
Great. So this expectation was whatever my phone can do, my watch should be able to do. This was really common. We heard this from a lot of participants. Definitely our prospective buyers who were coming in and using the watch often, or using one of the watches, a watch of their preference, for the first time. But, you know, this was also an expectation that even the owners had prior to, you know, them getting their watches as well. But the reality is my watch is good for committing, but terrible for browsing. And, users are super quick to realize this because, they start holding their wrists up for 5 minutes and realize, okay, I do not want to do this. So even though there's that initial expectation, they quickly get into this mode of like, okay, yep, I want just these short and sweet actions. And so that is our value driver number 3. Enable bite-sized interactions. We really have to keep not only notifications and content pared down to a bare minimum, but we want to enable actions and decisions and commitments with just one tap if possible. So let's look at a couple of examples. So Zara, the clothing retailer, they have an app, and you can browse all kinds of different outfits, but you can't do anything. You can't save the outfits. You can't purchase the outfits. It really just turns into this extended browsing session, which again, we've talked about is not a good idea. So don't do that. Here's what you can do. This is one of my favorite examples that we found. It's from Chipotle, and their app is simply a burrito button. And when you tap the burrito button, it will order your usual burrito at your usual store, and it will pay for it. And so all you have to do is push that button and then go drive or walk to that store and pick up your order. It's as simple as that. That is, pun intended, really the type of bite-sized interaction that we're talking about. And this is another great example. We found that the users really wanted to pair notifications with these bite-sized interactions. So, for example, with Chase checking here, you see that you get this notification, you've got $250 due on your account, but it's more than just a notification. You can take action right from your phone just with one single tap. And again, that's what we're really going for. So why does this matter? Well, again, even though our prospective buyers and owners had these initial expectations that they wanted to do everything on their watch that they could do on their phone, they really quickly realized that, no, they didn't want to do that. So one of our prospective Samsung buyers said, I wouldn't want to trade stocks or invest, but I'd do a balance check. And one of the LG owners said, it's good for quick things. So again, the users just realized that this was the case. So what can you do here? Well, you need to lighten the load and trim user steps. We want to make sure that we are lightening the load in terms of helping people remember things, providing the right types of notifications at the right time, but we also want to make sure that we're doing more than just providing notifications all the time. We want to move the watch beyond just being a notification engine. And so we do need to trim user steps. We need to look for these easily replicatable purchases, decisions, and other types of actions that customers could approve with just a single tap or two. Look at where a user has, taken repeated actions in the past. Can you repeat those? Or let's say that a user has started a task on their mobile device or on the web. There may be some situations where then they're just going to complete that task with a tap or two on their watch. So, you also want to look at things like preferences for purchases, things like shipping speed, payment type, the quantity, the frequency of things that people are ordering, and again, folding those into preferences like Chipotle did, where it's like, okay, yep, you're just going to be ordering one thing with this burrito button all the time. You can certainly change your preferences on your mobile phone or on the web, but this is just going to take all of those into consideration and give you one single option on your watch. That's really what we're looking for. Okay, let's talk about our expectation gap number 4. This was related to untethering. I can't wait to leave my phone at home. And the reality was, if my watch won't work without my phone, what's the point? As Amy said earlier, why even bother? Well, we did find here that, again, that back to phone syndrome that Amy talked about. And we just found that a lot of apps out there are not taking advantage of value driver 4, which is leveraging the device ecosystem. And this is really about 2 things. It's really about taking advantage of really the unique properties of the smartwatch and allowing people to do things on the smartwatch, that maybe are, again, a little more discreet or just really easy when they're right on your wrist without having to dig to your phone. But it is also about recognizing that the smartwatch is part of this broader ecosystem of devices. And we really need to think about how to seamlessly integrate the smartwatch with interactions involving another device, whether that be a tablet or a mobile phone or even a desktop computer. And who knows what other devices are going to come out in the future that we'll need to integrate with. So what did we find? What are some of the problems that we found? This is a great example of what not to do. And it came from Twitter, which was kind of surprising to us because Twitter seems like kind of the ultimate app to have on your wrist. 140 characters, wow, that just seems like the perfect size to look at on a smartwatch. But what we found was that Twitter provided this error message, and if you can't read this on your computer, it's a little bit dark here. It says, top trend, your credentials do not allow access to this resource. Again, it basically didn't tell you what to do. It didn't integrate with, your mobile phone or with, their website. It didn't tell you how to fix this problem. It really just kind of let you hanging there. And it just felt like, the watch was broken. There was really nothing to do, no help to be had there. So this is definitely a what not to do. We did find on a lot of the different devices, the mapping feature was a really exemplar of what we're talking about here. You would take your mobile phone and put in the address that you wanted to go to, just as you normally do with a mobile device, but then the watch sprung to life on its own. And even when your phone was in your bag or in your pocket, the watch would then give you turn-by-turn directions. And so this is really, the perfect way to think about having the watch communicate seamlessly with another device. We also found another really nice example from Redfin. So Redfin is the real estate app, and as you're walking around, Redfin would show you pictures on your watch of homes that were available to purchase nearby. But again, Redfin realized that no one's going to want to read through a detailed MLS listing on their wrist, and so what they did is they provided ways for you to favorite this so that you could go and do more research and follow up, get all the details on a larger device when you were ready to do that. So here's some great quotes from some of the participants at our study. An LGG owner said, if I wanted to purchase something, I'd want to look at a bigger screen. So again, our participants are acknowledging this ecosystem, and they're telling us, we don't want to do everything. We want to have that seamless transition from the watch to these other devices. But then you don't just want to be throwing them back to a larger device all the time. That's the back to phone syndrome that Amy talked about. This prospective Samsung buyer said, I don't like going back to the phone. I'm all about getting where I need to go the fastest way possible. And this is why this value driver is really about, again, leveraging the entire device ecosystem. It's about taking advantage of the unique properties of the watch when you can and allowing those really fast notifications, that are pared down and they're right at the right moment. And it's also about providing, those bite-sized interactions. But when that just isn't possible for the task at hand, you've got to find those seamless ways to get everyone back to the right device for the right task. So, just as I was talking about, it's really about abandoning this one-size-fits-all mentality, looking for smooth ways to hand off between devices, and also allowing people to set preferences on larger devices for what they want to have happen on the smaller devices.
Great. And so our very final expectation gap, and actually I think maybe even one of our most important, which is that users want to have a great understanding of what they're getting into when they open an app. And on their smartwatches, many of our users had no clue what their apps did, even after opening them. And so here you see the typical quote, WTF, what is this? What does this app even do? So our most important value driver here is to show utility immediately. Help people understand what this app does. So don't do this. I'm a frequent JetBlue customer, and when we were doing this research, I had a reservation for a flight from San Francisco to New York. I opened up the app on my Apple Watch, and you would have no clue that I had any kind of reservations or any planned travel based on what this says. The app makes absolutely no indication of what would make it useful. Can you book a flight? Can you check flight status? Do you make onboard purchases? There's no way to tell. And this countdown clock here feels so ominous. Am I getting on a flight taking me into heaven? It says, get your head in the clouds. So this is what not to do. And thinking about this is one of my favorites. Fandango only shows information if a user has an existing ticket. So if you don't have a ticket, you can't bypass any screenshots of movie quotes. And one day we opened up the app to find it, which is hilarious, but sadly not useful. So here's where a company did a great job with their app in providing utility immediately, which is OpenTable. They make a very specific promise. Users can get a reminder of existing reservations on their wrist, presumably at the appropriate time. And you know exactly what this app does. Never forget a reservation. When you book with OpenTable, we'll remind you here. So even if you have nothing going on, you understand the utility of the app until it's ready to be opened and live for you. So this is a really great best practice. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because people have high hopes. They have very specific mental models that shape their expectations for smartwatch apps. And if the functionality didn't match up or wasn't clear, the interest in the app cratered. And those mental models they've had shaped were not driven by the descriptions in the App Store. We often find that people don't even pay attention to those. Many of the participants in our studies had abandoned apps for weeks after initially not really understanding what their value would be. So it's kind of hard to recover after that first failed interaction. And I left this quote here, which is Jenny, who is a Moto 360 owner, who opened an app by accident and then had no idea what it did and then just got really frustrated with it and said, go away. So our recommendation here is to communicate early and often and provide immediate evidence of your app's benefits. So if your smartwatch app provides its full value in all contexts and locations, then great, carry on. But if your app is really only going to be relevant in certain circumstances, you've got to create a home screen that clearly shows when, where, and how the app is going to kick into gear. And then to set broader expectations when you're doing your online advertising and email newsletters and marketing communications, think about showing explicitly what your app does and showing it in action. So I'm going to summarize now. We had 5 value drivers. 1 was to get intimate with your users. 2, to curate ruthlessly. 3, enable bite-sized interactions. 4, leverage the device ecosystem. And 5, show utility now. So how do you get started doing these things?
Great. So what steps can you take to create smartwatch apps that work? Well, we have a few pieces of advice for you, some recommendations, and really they all center around this. To create killer smartwatch apps, that are truly going to be indispensable to your customers. You've got to live at the intersection of data analytics and qualitative research. You've got to understand really the context of people's lives, and you've got to put the meaning and really the insights that you can only get from qualitative research. You've got to find ways to pair that up with all of that data that I talked about earlier that's out living in your organization and on your customers' devices. So our first piece of advice is to embrace data. Really, the first thing that you need to do is go out and hunt and gather all of the data that you can across your organization. You want to talk to your marketing team, your customer service department, your sales team, all of your tech teams, and you want to find out what data they have about your customers, and you want to bring it all together. You want to plan to snoop. You want to determine what kind of data your app is going to be able to collect about your customers on the fly every single day while they're wearing it. And then you take all of that data, everything that you can collect about your customers internally, everything that you can collect about your customers on the fly, and you've got to learn, this is hard, how to predict the future. So you want to employ predictive analytics to anticipate common searches, requests, and actions. You can talk to your tech team and see if this is something that they can help you with, and if not, there are outside partners that I'm sure would love to help you build and test predictive models that are going to extract and then act on customers' intent.
All right, and so the next thing you can do to get started now is, really up your research game. So this tiny Smartwatch screen is such a big departure from the form factor of all the other devices out there. So you can't assume, which should be clear right now through all of our value drivers, what's going to work on one device is going to also work on a smartwatch. So figure out what customers actually want on their watches and make sure the app is easy to use in all situations. So you can think about doing qualitative research like ethnographic research, where you can discover opportunities for your watch app to enhance the experience of your brand or service by seeing users in their natural environments and looking at the gaps between what they're trying to achieve and what they can today and finding some gold nugget opportunity. And do usability testing. So as you're developing prototypes, it's so important to do that kind of testing at various stages of the app development to make sure that users get it, they understand it in all states, and they understand how to use it. And then when you're doing that usability testing, I just wanted to give some quick tidbits for some lessons that we learned from doing our testing in the lab. And the first is that you need to make sure that everyone's software is up to date before you go into the lab and make sure that everyone has their credentials to be able to download apps from the App Store. So if someone's forgotten their login information, that's going to make it really tough when you wanted to test apps. Also, I talked before about the arm fatigue. You can see everyone's arms here laying on the pillows. That's what we used to help people be more comfortable. But think about the flow of your moderator guide and giving people breaks. Don't ask people to be doing so many tasks in a row that they just can't leave their arm up there that long. And make sure you have some backup phones on hand that are connected to a service provider and already have some apps preloaded, because it's possible that you bring in a prospective buyer of a smartwatch and they have their smartphone with them and they have trouble connecting to your own watches that you have in stock. So it's good to always have just some backup contingency plans. And then lastly, really technical thing, just make sure you store those backup watches in a different room, because sometimes there can be some interactions on the Android devices kind of interfering with one another. So.
Great. The next recommendation that we have is that you need to map your customers' journeys. So no one uses a smartwatch in a vacuum, of course. All of these tiny little watch interactions, they play into larger customer goals. And so you'll need to understand not just how customers use or want to use the watch, but really how their watch-based interactions fit into these larger needs and objectives. And journey maps can help with this. So this is an example journey map that I love. You don't have to see the details of this, but this came from Intuit, and it's basically a diagram that lets you see really the highs and lows of the customer experience. And so this is really similar to something that you can build quite easily out of sticky notes and a large sheet of just butcher paper. And there's two types of journey maps that you want to think about building. The first is the current state journey map, and this is going to help you understand what your customers are going through today without a smartwatch, and you can identify friction points that your app can then help to alleviate. You can also think about creating future state journey maps, and these are going to help you envision how your app will fit into your customers' daily lives in the future, of course, with a smartwatch, and then how they'll use that smartwatch app that you're creating in conjunction with other devices so that you can, of course, leverage that entire device ecosystem.
All right, and our next recommendation for getting started now is to experiment. It is a perfect time for brands to do some trial and error experimentation because they're not real leaders stepping in to fill the app void. So collaborate, combine what your data analytics is telling you with insights gleaned from your qualitative research. Develop prototypes and test and see where you lend out and what you might want to launch. And then iterate. Nothing you put out there live the first time will be perfect. Learn from what's out there and iterate on what you've developed.
So what's next? We've shared with you really the current state of the smartwatch user experience and really the types of things that you need to be thinking about today. But of course, this is going to be a space that is continually evolving. We're going to see, of course, lots of software and operating system updates that come out from the watch manufacturers. We're also seeing new watches. So the Pebble Time is out now. It wasn't out when we did our study a couple of months ago, but that's out now. We also have the Swatch smartwatch, which is coming out soon. And, it's not just the hardware and software that's going to continue to evolve. As more and more functionality becomes available and possible, we're going to see that customers' expectations for what they can do with the smartwatch is also going to increase. And so this is something that you're going to continually need to do research on for really the unforeseeable future, as long as smartwatches continue to be adopted by customers. So we just wanted to thank the contributors on this research. We had a great team of folks from both AnswerLab and Kerry, Bodine & Co. who were working on this, organizing it, running the research studies, writing up the report, and we want to thank all of them. They were really fantastic. And with that, we want to say thank you. We hope that you got a lot out of this webinar. We thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to download the free report, there's a lot more detail in it than we got into on our call today. You can grab one of those URLs and download the report. And also, we're going to be sending out the report in email to everyone who was on the webinar today as well. So we want to say thanks again, and I think we have a few minutes left for questions.
Right. So Tanya, taking your questions. Look forward to hearing what Tanya has to say here.
Great, thank you guys. Also a quick reminder, we'll be sending a follow-up email that contains those links to that report as well, so you guys will be getting a copy of that. And I'm pulling a couple of questions out of our chat window here. Let's see, did prospective buyers change their minds about wanting a watch after experimenting with the demo watches? Oh, good question. Amy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is no, actually. So they were interested in the watch, and when they saw it, they still continued to be interested in it. It's not that their experience being, frustrated turned them off, because many of the reasons why people were interested in the watch to begin with had to do with kind of the coolness factor. It was just that, if you think about a lot of these folks, they're early adopters. What the reasons that are driving them, their purchase drivers, made them more forgiving of the watch altogether.
Great, thank you. Another question about those pre-purchase or early adopters. Study participants identified themselves as early adopters, and that was a big part of their decision to purchase. How do you predict that purchase drivers might change the longer that smartwatches are around?
Well, right now, if you think back to that bullseye model that we showed, and in the context of what Amy just said, the smartwatches today are really the luxury items, right? They're not unforgettable, for sure. They're still cool, they're fun and flashy, but they are luxury items, right? And so what we hope to see happen is that as brands use these value drivers that we've identified, we really hope that these apps will move from, forgettable into, really being just indispensable in people's lives, just as the apps on our smartphones are. And as that happens, we expect the smartwatch to also become indispensable, like our smartphones. And we do expect it to move into that bullseye center of really the smartwatch being an appendage. And so, at that point, the value drivers change dramatically. It's not just about being cool. It's about, I need this device to just function in my life. Again, I think we're a far way from that situation right now because we just need the apps to make the watch indispensable. But at that point, I think then it becomes the value drivers are like, okay, well, I need this. So what's the right watch for me? What's the right price point? What's the right style consideration? But I think that the value drivers will very quickly move to be very similar to what they are for the smartphone today.
Great, thank you. Another question, were there any favorite apps that you found users mentioning unprompted?
Yeah, some of the apps that we mentioned today are apps that we learned about from our users. So things like Dark Sky, things like the Burrito app from Chipotle. I don't know if you remember the picture that we showed right at the beginning of the user with the pillow. She was showing us the Burrito app. I would say the ones that we highlighted in our report are really the ones that people mentioned.
Great. Following on from that, what types of tasks were participants not interested in completing on their watches?
Oh, that's a great question. So really, any task that requires complexity, complex reading, lots of scrolling, complex input, or anything that really requires the user to have to hold up their arm for a period of time, as I mentioned before. You want to be able to kind of poke really quickly at the device and get the information that you want, and you want to be able to glance at something really quickly and get the information you want, right? So you complete a task with a couple of quick pokes, and then you take a couple of quick glances, and you can do it. And so anything that required more than that from a task standpoint, people really did not want to do. And then another thing to think about, too, is like what kind of situations were people not interested in even having their watches. And it was interesting, at this stage, it's still very early, a lot of users felt that they didn't want to wear their watch to a formal event because they wanted to wear their fancy watches that they had saved up for and bought, their luxury items, to more formal events like a wedding. And they would keep this kind of as more utilitarian for other things. Lots of folks didn't want to wear it to sleep. Even, they didn't want to be a sleep monitor because it felt clunky on their arm because it's kind of big. And then you have, the idea of high-intensity workouts and getting in the pool. People are afraid to obviously put it in the pool because something could happen to it, but they're afraid to use it on some of the higher-intensity workouts, even though with the Apple Watch in particular, it can be really an aid in fitness because it has what feels like some delicacy to it. So those were kinds of the things that people were hesitant on.
Yeah, I just want to add in terms of the formal events. I mean, these are people who were saying like, oh, even the Apple Watch I don't want to wear, even to a formal event. Even the Apple Watch isn't fancy enough. So it wasn't just some of the other devices that we were looking at. Even the higher end design devices weren't good enough.
Thank you. We're right at time, so I'm going to cut off the questions there. You guys had a ton of great questions. If there's something we didn't get to that you want to follow up on, please feel free to contact us directly, info@answerlab.com. Kerry and AnswerLab are both on Twitter, and that information is available at the end of the deck. And wanted to say thank you for joining us today. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with all of the information that you saw here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.